Have you ever noticed how some women seem to possess an almost magnetic power without even trying? They don't chase, they don't explain themselves, they don't constantly text back. They simply withdraw their energy, and suddenly everyone around them becomes fascinated, desperate to understand, desperate to get closer, desperate to earn what they no longer freely give. Now imagine if you understood exactly how this works. If you could harness this same psychological force that makes unavailable women absolutely irresistible, that's what we're exploring today. Because the psychology behind this phenomenon runs much deeper than simple playing hard to get. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And today you'll discover why women who truly accept themselves, who become genuinely unavailable, create a psychological dynamic that no one can resist. But first, let me ask you something. When was the last time you found yourself constantly available for everyone? Responding to texts immediately, saying yes when you wanted to say no, explaining yourself to people who hadn't even asked for explanations. How did that feel? You probably felt drained, undervalued, maybe even invisible. Because here's what psychology teaches us. What is always available becomes background noise. What requires no effort to obtain gets no respect. But the woman who becomes genuinely unavailable, she becomes the melody everyone stops to hear. But why does this happen? What is it about unavailability that triggers such powerful attraction? The answer lies in how our minds are wired to value scarcity and chase what retreats from us. Jung understood that human psychology operates on the principle of psychic energy. Every time you make yourself constantly available, you're hemorrhaging this precious energy. You're telegraphing to everyone around you that your time, your attention, your very presence has no real value. But when a woman withdraws this availability, something fascinating happens in the observer's mind. Suddenly, what was taken for granted becomes precious. What was ignored becomes desired. The human psyche cannot resist trying to solve a mystery, and an unavailable woman becomes the ultimate puzzle. Think about the women in your life who command the most respect. I guarantee you, they're not the ones constantly explaining themselves or begging for attention. They're the ones who've learned to guard their energy like the precious resource it truly is. But here's where most people get this completely wrong. And that's what we need to explore next. Because there's a massive difference between authentic unavailability and manipulative game playing. And understanding this difference is what separates women who become genuinely irresistible from those who just become exhausting. Let's be crystal clear about something. When we talk about becoming unavailable, we're not talking about manipulation tactics or playing hard to get. Those strategies might work temporarily, but they're exhausting to maintain and ultimately hollow. What we're exploring is something much more profound, something Jung called individuation. The process of becoming so complete within yourself that you no longer need external validation to feel whole. When a woman reaches this state, her unavailability isn't a strategy, it's simply her natural state of being. Have you ever met someone who is clearly comfortable being alone? Not lonely, not bitter, just genuinely content with their own company. There's something deeply attractive about that energy, isn't there? It's because they're not performing availability, they're not seeking anything from you, and that creates a space where genuine connection can actually occur. Jung taught that every interaction is an exchange of psychic energy. When you're constantly available, you're giving your energy away freely, without requiring any investment in return. But when you become selectively available, you're essentially saying, my energy is valuable, and access to it must be earned. This creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the same principle that makes gambling addictive. When your attention and availability become unpredictable rewards rather than guaranteed outcomes, people become far more invested in earning them. But here's what most women don't realize. Your energy signature communicates long before you ever speak a word. People can sense whether you're desperately seeking validation or whether you're genuinely content within yourself. And they respond accordingly. Now, this is where it gets really interesting from a psychological perspective. When you become truly unavailable, you stop serving as a screen for other people's projections. You know what I mean by projections. It's when people see in you what they need to see, rather than who you actually are. The constantly available woman becomes whatever others need her to be, the supportive friend, the understanding listener, the problem solver. But the unavailable woman forces people to see her as she actually is, because she's no longer performing these roles on demand. This is deeply uncomfortable for people who are used to using others as emotional regulators. When you withdraw your availability, you're essentially saying, I will no longer manage your emotions for you. And this forces them to either develop their own emotional maturity or seek their emotional drugs elsewhere. Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. When you become unavailable, watch who gets irritated. Watch who tries to guilt you back into your old patterns. These reactions will tell you everything you need to know about the true nature of those relationships. But why does this unavailability create such powerful attraction? And how can you cultivate this energy authentically without losing your capacity for genuine connection? That's what we're diving into next. Here's what happens in the human brain when faced with an unavailable woman. First, scarcity triggers what psychologists call loss aversion. We naturally assign higher value to things we might lose than to things we can easily obtain. Your unavailability makes your presence a limited resource, and limited resources become precious. Second, mystery activates the brain's problem-solving circuits. When someone can't easily read you or predict your responses, their mind becomes obsessed with figuring you out. This mental engagement creates a form of psychological investment that feels like attraction. But here's the most powerful element: authentic unavailability signals high self-worth. When a woman genuinely doesn't need validation or attention to feel complete, she radiates a kind of confidence that others find irresistible. Not because she's trying to be attractive, but because she's no longer seeking attraction as a means of self-validation. Think about this. When have you ever been most attracted to someone? Was it when they were constantly available, always responding immediately, always accommodating your schedule? Or was it when their attention felt like something special, something earned rather than given? The constantly available woman trains people to take her for granted, but the selectively available woman trains people to value her presence. She doesn't create artificial scarcity through games. She creates natural scarcity through standards. When you have genuine interests, goals, and a life that fulfills you, your unavailability becomes authentic. You're not playing hard to get. You actually are hard to get because you're busy creating a life you love. And this authentic unavailability is what creates genuine, lasting attraction. Jung wrote extensively about the concept of psychological independence. When a woman achieves this independence, she stops needing others to complete her emotionally. She engages with people from a place of choice rather than need. And this shift changes everything about how others perceive and interact with her. Have you ever noticed how some women seem to remain interesting and attractive, regardless of their relationship status? It's because their sense of self isn't dependent on external validation. They're not performing for approval. They're simply being themselves, and that authenticity is magnetic. But here's what most people fear about becoming truly unavailable. They worry they'll become cold, distant, or lonely. This fear keeps them trapped in patterns of over-availability that drain their energy and diminish their value. But authentic unavailability isn't about building walls, it's about having boundaries. The irresistible woman isn't unavailable because she's rejecting connection. She's unavailable because she's selective about where she invests her precious time and energy. And this selectivity makes her chosen connections far more meaningful and passionate than the scattered energy of the constantly available woman. But how do you cultivate this authentic unavailability without losing your natural warmth and capacity for deep connection? That's the art we're exploring in our final section. Becoming genuinely unavailable isn't about changing your behavior to manipulate others. It's about changing your relationship with yourself. When you truly value your own time, energy, and presence, you naturally become more selective about how you share these resources. Start by asking yourself this question: what would you do with your time if you weren't constantly managing other people's emotions or meeting their expectations? What interests would you pursue? What goals would you work toward? What experiences would you seek? The woman who has compelling answers to these questions naturally becomes less available because she's busy creating a life worth living. Jung believed that individuation requires solitude, not isolation, but periods of genuine solitude where you reconnect with your authentic self. When you're comfortable being alone with yourself, you stop accepting low-quality connections just to avoid loneliness. This comfort with solitude is one of the most attractive qualities a woman can possess. Here's how this looks in practice. Instead of immediately responding to every text, you respond when it's convenient for you, not to play games, but because you respect your own time and attention. Instead of saying yes to every social invitation, you choose the ones that genuinely interest you. You stop explaining yourself to people who haven't earned that level of intimacy. You stop managing other people's emotions or taking responsibility for their reactions. You create and maintain boundaries not to punish others, but to protect your own energy and well-being. The irresistibly unavailable woman has developed what Jung called a strong sense of self. She knows who she is, what she values, and what she will and won't accept in her life. This clarity creates a natural magnetism because people are drawn to those who seem to have figured out something they're still struggling with. But let's acknowledge the shadow side of this transformation. When you become genuinely unavailable, some people will not like it. Those who benefited from your constant availability will try to guilt you back into old patterns. They might call you selfish, cold, or difficult. This is where you discover who was truly invested in you as a person versus who was simply using you as an emotional resource. The people who respect your boundaries and value your selective availability are worth keeping. Those who demand constant access to your energy, revealing their own emotional immaturity. Jung taught that every transformation involves a kind of death, the death of who you used to be. Becoming irresistibly unavailable means killing the people-pleasing version of yourself. And not everyone will appreciate this transformation, especially those who benefited from the old you. The ultimate goal isn't to become unavailable to everyone. It's to become selectively available to those who truly deserve access to your time, energy, and emotional resources. When you master this selectivity, your relationships become deeper, more authentic, and far more satisfying. The irresistibly unavailable woman isn't playing hard to get. She actually is hard to get because she's created a life so fulfilling that access to her becomes a privilege rather than a right. And those who earn this access find themselves in the presence of someone truly extraordinary, someone who has learned to value herself so deeply that others can't help but value her too. If this exploration has resonated with you, I encourage you to start small. Choose one area of your life where you've been overavailable and begin to pull back your energy. Notice what happens, both within yourself and in your relationships. You might be surprised by how much respect and attraction you gain by simply valuing yourself enough to become selectively unavailable. Remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. When you accept constant availability as your default, you teach others that your time and energy have no real value. But when you become irresistibly unavailable, you teach the world that access to you is a privilege to be earned, not a right to be assumed. What aspects of your life have you been too available in? And what would change if you started valuing your energy as the precious resource it truly is? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your journey toward authentic unavailability might inspire another woman to reclaim her power too.